This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Daniel Braum about his new collection, PHANTOM Constellations. Daniel Braum writes short stories that explore the tension between the psychological and the supernatural. He intentionally adopts the term strange tales for his Twilight Zone-like stories in homage to author Robert Aickman and the intentional ambiguities of his work. His stories have appeared in places ranging from The Best Horror of the Year, Volume 12, edited by Ellen Datlow, and Shivers 8, edited by Richard Chismar. He is also the host of the Nighttime Logic reading and interview series. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. It's great to be here.
My icebreaker question is a literal icebreaker. How's the weather?
In need of ice breaking. Winter has been cruel. Well, winter has been sassy to us. We did just a week ago get this massive ice storm, and for 2 weeks we've been buried under ice. Finally, we had a day or two respite. What does winter decide to do? Send us another 16 to 24 inches and perhaps the largest storm in a decade or two.
Did you grow up on the East Coast?
I did. I sure did.
Do you feel like this was more common when you were a kid?
Feels like it only because we've been spoiled. The last few years have been snowless winters, and it was a nice little break to do. I mean, snow is beautiful when it comes down, and I like it. When you're a kid and to enjoy the kid-like aspects of it. But in New York, it becomes a snarl. It becomes an inconvenience, and it becomes dirty after a while.
That's interesting. I feel like New York kind of holds on to the cold. You know, like it's an urban hotspot in terms of a heat sink, and you need green space to cool down these urban areas. But when it really gets cold like that, I feel like everything the cold sinks in and it holds on to those big piles of dirty snow.
It sure does.
I want to work my way backwards through your bio to set up the collection. And
sure.
The first thing I'll hit is Nighttime Logic.
Yes.
That is a series that you do with Cemetery Dance Online. But can you tell me a bit more about the series and what you mean by Nighttime Logic?
Absolutely. Nighttime logic is a term of fiction that I didn't coin. I believe it was a term coined by fabulous author Harold Waldrop. And in short, what it means is the parts of the story that is felt, but not necessarily consciously processed. Like that bottom, like the story, the four corners of the story, like the plot that we're seeing is like the tip of the iceberg. But the emotional realities, the synchronicities, the emotional weight, and perhaps not conscious connections, that's the bottom part of the iceberg. And that's the nighttime logic, using the term of art that way. I first heard of the term, authors Peter Straub and Kelly Link often use it when describing certain types of fiction. Peter Straub in particular used it when describing what was special and how Robert Aickman's fiction operates. And when I heard him speak about that, it literally was an epiphany to me. At that point, I had been writing for some time, but it's when everything came together for me and for my writing and for just where my writing fit into the larger scheme of horror. Because up until that point, even though I had been published by Cemetery Dance, it was the eve of my first short story collection coming out. And based on all that, my editor and I decided to title my first collection, The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales, based on Strange Tales referencing Robert Aickman and Nighttime Logic. We can also talk about the series because the series is a column over at Cemetery Dance and a YouTube show of the same name. I look to explore and discuss dark fiction and horror with an eye on stories that operate with that nighttime logic.
That transitions us to Strange Tales and Robert Aickman. Can you give us an overview of Robert Aickman for people that may not be familiar?
Yeah.
Because that's the mode we're going to be in as we talk about this collection.
Yeah, now I'm a relative newcomer to Robert Aickman as well. Robert Aickman is a British author who was writing in the 1960s, 1970s, the bulk of his work. He wrote quiet horror and ghost stories that were very, very nostalgic, very British. And in those stories, they're the kind of stories that maybe American authors They might feel a little more like The Twilight Zone or like Shirley Jackson. They're stories where the supernatural is not identifiable as those things that we commonly identify as ghosts and goblins, as ghouls. It's people having strange experiences that might be some of those things. Sometimes it's not that at all. The thing about the hallmark of Aikman stories is whatever is happening to the protagonists are rarely, if ever, explained. And it's rarely, if ever, about, like in Bram Stoker's Dracula, it's about a conflict. It's about defeating this vampire. Aikman writes a set of humanistic stories about people's encounters with the supernatural, or at least with the unknowable or unexplainable.
What's fun about a Robert Aikman strange tale is that chances are everyone you know has some story about something really weird that happened to them where things felt off.
Yeah.
I can't even really explain the wrongness of it.
On first glance, one might be like, well, that's not so scary, or, oh, the other stuff is scary. But the Aikman sort of stories, the way they don't quite line up, if you let them, they will stay with you and start to unnerve you and be like, yeah, there was this really weird thing that happened at the beach, or we went to this town and I can't quite put a finger on it. And it starts to become, if not more and more unnerving, certainly fuel for the dark side of the imagination.
So I feel like we've set the table pretty well for your collection. Let's get into it. Do you have like a back of the book copy that you can read?
I'm literally looking on the back of the book. Let's see. The back of the book tells us, phantom constellations are all around us. Are you seeing what you think you are seeing? Are the connections that we make objectively true? Or are they products of our minds assigning meaning and sense when there is none? The stars in the sky exist, unaffected by how we choose to categorize them. The constellations are phantoms. They have only the shapes and meanings we give them. Our lives, our loves, all of our relationships are phantoms, all only as real as we make them.
I think a reader will notice very quickly that a lot of these stories feature Latin America in some way.
Yes.
The other two touchstones are New York and the California desert. It seemed to me like the modern urban New York was used as a contrast to Latin America, whereas the California desert is a transitional space. It's sort of half Mexico, half America, half modern, half old world. Mm-hmm. Were these intentional choices? Were you just fascinated with Latin America at the time of the writing?
First of all, I have to say, I love that analysis of it. So that question totally holds water. I'd never quite thought of looking at it that way, but it totally resonated with me when you said that. In short, there's the literary reason, and then there's perhaps the real world reason. The real world reason is I'm from New York. I've lived in California, and I've always been fascinated with Latin America. So that just seems like where over decades of writing, where the stories sort of bunch up and then become collected together. Yeah. So in as far as fiction go, I didn't think of it that way, but I am fascinated by the concepts of liminality, and my writing process and my writing intention is setting forward. Often the inspiration, or most of the time the inspiration, comes from the setting, and I try to find the characters and the conflicts that are unique to those settings. One of the recurring themes, at least consciously for me, is Latin America seems like the transitional space to me. Not between the other spaces, but a lot of places in Latin America and even around the world, just Latin America were the ones that I've seen or read about, feel like they're not set in the way perhaps other places are. New York, Paris, these big cities, they're set. Their history is we know what they are. But some of these other places, they're still growing up as to, are they going to be left? Are they going to be right? Are they going to be X? Are they going to be Y? And I feel like there's a lot of conflicts inherent in those. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with Latin American settings and the people, and potentially supernatural, who find themselves there.
What I love and sort of am stymied by in certain places in Latin America is that there's so much ancient history that every time they try to install a new sewer line or dig up a building so they could put something new there, they find bones, they find ruins, they find old churches and temples. And it's that strange paralysis of the ancient world surfacing. And then they have to decide, okay, are we going to preserve our culture and our heritage, or are we going to extend this highway because people live here now and they need to get around? And that strange Tetris game of getting hemmed in slowly but surely by more and more ruins. If you look at LiDAR maps of Latin America, it's just thousands and thousands of years of building in stone under everything. And you almost can't exist there in a modern context if you are trying to hold on to that old world and you're trying to straddle them both.
Really well said. And the discovery, we know so little. The empires and infrastructure is so vast, and the conflict that you mentioned is real. I'll have to get you a copy. My novella, The Serpent Shadow, is about that directly head on, that particular novella. But it's certainly, it's real conflict. There's no easy answer. And at least for we fiction readers and writers, it makes for a lot of interesting stories there.
What are some of the stories in the collection that you would like to point out that feature Latin America?
The two that are popping to my mind immediately are a Loch Ness Monster Under the Light of the Southern Cross and Where the Jaguar King Lives in the Dark Heart of the Wood are two Latin American set stories. There are more, but those are the two that I figured I'd mention because they bridge both parts of our conversation. Those two are most certainly strange tales. I think they're successful in that they are strange tales, but they also embody those themes and setting of Latin America. And what I mean by that they're strange tales is we talked about the first story in the collection very briefly, and I was like, oh, that's a great one. I'm glad we picked it. But then I always felt like we're cheating because eventually that story, what happens, is explained. But in the Loch Ness Monster story and the Jaguar King story, what really is going on is much more subtle and is still left intentionally ambiguous. So the stories are while they're about these rich settings and supernatural happenings, they're really about the internal journeys and conflicts of the characters in those stories.
I see that with the exception of a few scenes in New York or people growing up, there's very little to root yourself in a sort of status quo. Most of your stories feature characters that are in transit, they're traveling, they're in a new context, they're in a new place. Is that always intentional to have people sort of rubbing against new settings?
I think it's intentional on a certain level. It's not something I set out to do using those words. What I do set out to do is when I'm thinking of finding the starting points of the stories, I do want to find people in their conflict points. So often it is people who have choices in front of them. So that's what I'm thinking when I'm deciding who are going to be the characters and where are we going to meet them, which is sort of, I think it's just semantics. And then it winds up being, people who are always traveling or in between, traveling quite literally or traveling between places in their life. So I think I said yes to that.
That feels very British to me. That feels like, it feels like a flavor of British ghost stories is that they're often on holiday or they're traveling or they're going to some old manor that, was in the family that they haven't been to in a long time. And you get that estrangement. And I don't know if it's more of a suburban modern flavor of which is you're at home and something strange happens and starts to invade the safety of your home base. I don't know, something about thinking about Robert Aikman. I don't know. I'm thinking of all this like people traveling, people in transit.
Yeah.
going to new places, being exposed to new ideas and people, and then often that sort of deeper British revulsion of otherness, whereas that other mode is like you're at home and there's like maybe a problem you're not addressing, and then it kind of insinuates itself, it invades, and that might have more to do with sort of the American consciousness of repression.
I think that's a super interesting analysis on there, and I think you're onto something. Of course, yeah, like we could find exceptions to all that stuff, but as I'm learning more and more about the British ghost story, a lot of it, like M.R. James and Aikman, is a lot of like, we were on the seaside and we were staying in Manor X, and they see something strange down there, the M.R. James. And yeah, I mean, I'll definitely take that as a compliment, because I love British ghost stories so much. But I think there's also a lot of wisdom and fuel to, yeah, that American, we're knocking down like, well, every house is haunted. Our houses are haunted. The emotional suburban or urban Americanism is just as haunted as well. And yeah, I'd like to think I bring a little bit of both to the table, to the stories, and that a lot of my locales are far flung, but hopefully the emotional realities are not like, oh, the crusty haunted house. These are about vital, down to earth people's lives and hauntings in that way.
So Loch Ness Monster is partially set in Belize, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking of the cenote in Above the Buried City and sort of the waterhole in Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah, they're both cenotes.
Even Jaguar King is set on the shore.
Yeah, water elements, it's been pointed out to me that water elements recur a lot over the course of just not this collection, but my collections.
Classic liminal space, classic border between two worlds.
I wish I could say that was intentional. In over the years in interviews about other books, people, so here's your new nautical theme, and now it took me aback, but I'm like, can't really deny that. I mean, to cut the question off at the pass, that some things are completely unintentional or unintended, but maybe we keep going back to what, especially the liminal, to what fascinates us and what inspires us, and yeah, there's something about those water elements and places at those edges of civilization that keep me coming back.
But then you've also got those desert spaces that your characters return to or are haunted by, which is its own version of a water setting. In that, I mean, you would
extreme on the continuum.
You would think the desert would be the opposite of a watery setting, but really it is its own strange, barren other world. But there is life there under the surface if you know where to look. And it's just as hazardous, or can be, as going too far into a watery setting. What's a story in this collection that you haven't had a chance to talk about much?
Phantom Constellations, it's the title story of the book. It's perhaps one of the longest story in the book, and it's set over a period of years, different times of life for the main characters. And it's one of the California set stories, and perhaps it is a story with the most subtle speculative elements in there. It's sort of, I'm not sure if it's a badge of honor or a badge of shame. I normally never talk about close calls for submissions, but a dream market of mine, that the story made it to the editor, and the editor was like, Daniel, I was really close to accepting this story, but they were like, I'm not quite sure if there's anything supernatural that happens here in this story. So one of the things I was trying to do in that story was have the supernatural turn on just a hair, on just the head of a pin. So it's a story like what you're saying, Jeff. A lot of it is about the desert as being more than just a physical space. It's a desert, at least as a receptacle of emotion, if not emotional danger, and what it means to a group of friends, as they're growing up and trying to find their places with themselves and with each other, and how much of that is real and how much of that is perceived.
The collection takes its title from this story. Was this what you had in mind as sort of the anchor for the collection? Did you gather stories around it and add new stories to reinforce these themes?
It was the opposite of that, except that it is the anchor of the collection, because I had the concept and Phantom Constellations was one of the last ones that was written. So it was like the story was written to anchor and to consolidate all these other themes, the themes of perception, illusion, ambiguity in our relationships. And Phantom Constellations is certainly the one that's the most about relationships, even though all the stories are about relationships.
How interconnected are these stories?
I think there are some interconnections. We were talking a bit about the unintentional ones, your analysis of the geography, the psychogeography of it. There are a couple of intentional interconnections. Tiki Bar at the Edge of Forever and the Loch Ness Monster do feature a character or two in common. One of the characters is deceased. So a father and a child who passed away, and there's another character who it's much later on in their life, and in that story she's going down to find her father, who after the events of the other story has disappeared. So they're not, in that way, they're not direct linear sequels, but they're sharing like an emotional core, looking at it from different periods of time in mourning and loss and from different characters' viewpoints.
Why don't you treat us to one more story from the collection?
Yeah, we can. Since we were talking about those British ghost stories, one of the shortest stories in the collection is one with one of the longest titles, Do Not Whistle, and It Will Not Come to You, O Lad, which is a play on an M.R. James story and an M.R. James title, Whistle, and It Will Come to You, O Lad. And that was just a short, it's a short ghost story where it was written for a anthology on ghosts, and the editor had some delightful guidelines in saying these ghosts have to be malevolent. They have to be M.R. Jamesian, with no friendly ghosts, no Casper, no. And I'm like, okay, my ghosts aren't always malevolent, and I dove a little deeper into my M.R. James. So it wound up being a bit of a love note, a bit of an Easter egg hunt to all those M.R. James in particular, by playing on and riffing on not only the title, but his famous ghost story.
And the setting?
And the setting, very specifically, the settings are identical on different sides of the pond. One in Long Beach, New York, and one in the UK. But they're both stories where people are seeing weird, cryptic phantoms on the beach.
So we've got our watery setting again.
Yes.
I like that you had the characters under the pier, because that, for anyone who's ever gone under a pier, it is such a creepy space.
Talk about a liminal space.
Yeah.
Right? The liminal space, long before I ever knew what the word is, that was the most liminal, quite literally liminal if we're looking between water and land, liminal if we're looking between night and day, liminal between summer and not summer. I mean, it's the liminal lover's dream.
Liminal between up and down, because you're underneath looking up at people or hearing the rumble of cars going overhead. A lot of times, you're looking up through little slivers at people who don't know you're there. And it is so strange to, be out in the heat and light of the summer day and then go into this dank, dark space. And if you go at night, then the beach is dark, but it might be like some old buzzing sodium lights at best under the pier. And then just all the bugs are in there because that's where the light is. And you don't know who else or what else is sheltering under the pier. Just the perfect location.
Again, one of those blessed synchronicities. And I was using that because, that's what we did when we were kids, and didn't even have that the wonderful things we're discussing at the top of my mind. They were definitely in that nighttime part of my mind when creating it.
Can you tell us a bit about the cover art for this collection?
Oh, I'm really glad you mentioned it. It's done by Dan Sauer, who has had the good fortune of working with him before. He's a fantastic artist. He also runs Jackanapes Press. He did the cover of my first short story collection, the Cemetery Dance reissue of The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales. He has a photorealistic style based on akin to classic cover artist J.K. Potter. And I just absolutely love working with him. I love the cover of Phantom Constellations. The previous collection before this was called Creatures of Liminal Space. That was done with Dan Sauer's Jackanapes Press, and it's an illustrated volume.
Daniel, what projects are you working on next?
Always working on stories for my next collection and putting the finishing touches on larger works.
Where can our listeners find you online?
My website is Blood and Stardust at WordPress.com, but you could find me on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky as well.
Fantastic. Daniel, thanks for hanging out and getting liminal with us today.
Oh, it was great talking about Halloween and all those liminal spaces. A true joy. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.
Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please subscribe and follow. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.